Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I'm your host, Richard Costello, and today I'm pleased to introduce Adam Mitchell. Adam is currently Vice President, Asset Management and Development at Low Tide Properties, responsible for the strategic direction and financial performance of a diverse portfolio of creative and high-tech office, life science, flex industrial, retail and multifamily rental properties in emerging neighbourhoods in Vancouver and Seattle. Prior to joining Low Tide in December 2018, Adam worked in real estate investments for Bentall Kennedy. Adam has a BCom, Urban Land Economics from UBC, and is actively involved in the industry, serving on non-profit boards for the Urban Land Institute of BC, Catalyst Communities, and the Mount Pleasant Business Improvement Association. In our conversation today, we'll hear more about Adam's career journey and current role. We'll learn about life at Low Tide and how the group is doing things differently, as well as Adam's hot takes on the market and advice for aspiring real estate professionals. Adam, welcome to the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
So we'll spend some time today talking about how Low Tide is doing things differently. But that said, your career path from studying urban land economics at UBC to the 7 years you spent at Bentall Kennedy prior to joining Low Tide is refreshingly straightforward. So kind of taking us back to the early days, the early career days, what first drew you to studying real estate at UBC?
Yeah, refreshingly straightforward is actually nice to hear when talking about my path into real estate. The last time I heard that in a conversation was actually in an interview for my first role at Bentall Kennedy. And the question was along the lines of, your path is a fairly standard one with an urban land economics degree from UBC. We see 30 different versions of you every time we have a job posting. What separates you? And I remember I kind of struggled with that question a little bit. I'm not sure exactly what I said, but it obviously passed the test to get the role with Bentall when I started there, my 7-year run there. But I was recently asked a similar version of that question by a consultant that we were working with last year here in Vancouver. And we were having dinner and they asked it along the lines of, what makes you stand out against your peers? And it was both in terms of Low Tide as a company, but also myself. And I think after almost 20 years in the industry, I certainly have a much clearer idea of what that is. And it's kind of what drew me into real estate to begin with, both from the academic realm at my time at UBC, but then as a career thereafter. And I think I've always, as I answered it to this consultant, I always had this borderline obsession or ability to focus on details. And I think that's, it shows up in a lot of different areas in your life. But I remember as a kid, I could remember the statistics on the back of hockey cards, almost kind of like photographically. And I was able to kind of catalog things, remember the fundamental details of them, and then pairing that with an ability to create connections. And I think putting those things together, as I answered it for this consultant, was, if I had to put a finger on what drove me into real estate and what's made me stand out, either as a professional or with our company, is the ability to break things down to a very simplistic form, but also then create connections. And working real estate is a people business, and working with people and those connections, or whether it's connections with tenants and buildings, whatever it may be, that is what I get the most enjoyment out of my work from. And it just so happens to be something I seem to have an aptitude for.
like, were there people in your life growing up that were in the industry? That seems to be quite a common thing for a lot of folks in Vancouver.
Yeah, I came into it somewhat blind. My dad was a millwright over on Vancouver Island in Nanaimo, and my mom was a school teacher. So we didn't really have much exposure to real estate on the commercial level. Certainly on the residential level, you see houses for sale on your street all the time, and you understand what the residential side of the market is. But I really didn't have exposure in it until I started at UBC, and I started actually in engineering, not in commerce. And through my first 2 years in the engineering program, I wanted to become an architect, or at least I thought I wanted to become an architect. And that's where I was heading. And I got involved with a professor at UBC named Sir Somerville, who at the time was really looking to build up the urban land economics program within the commerce degree. I think there was maybe the year before I transferred from engineering into commerce, there was probably only 20 or so students who had made that their major within the commerce program. And so there was a bit of a promotion on, and I'd attended some of the events that group was throwing on campus as they were trying to promote it, but also educate people on what actually the urban land economics program was, because it was fairly new. And at that time, one of the first in Canada. I thought I wanted to be an architect. And then after learning more about what actually the urban land economics program was, I understood that my interest was much more aligned to the portfolio asset and investment management side of real estate. And so that's when I made the switch from engineering to commerce to pursue the urban land economics degree.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So kind of good timing in terms of that course being offered and promoted. Saw Somerville has had a big impact on the industry. Like he's influenced a lot of people.
Yeah, he really has. He's been in it in an academic sense for a long time, and even within the context of Vancouver has really understood or contributed to the thinking on how the city has grown. But I think it's his probably biggest impact is through the number of students that have come through that program and are now working in the industry, and all the things that we did within that urban land economics program at the time were very hands-on. Like it was real world examples, real world assignments. And I think what that did was just elevate not only the realness of it, but people's passion for the asset class, because it went from just being theoretical in a textbook to really understanding and how to match up those theories with what's happening out in the market. And I think it when you're seeing that at such a young age, it really gets you to, I think, not necessarily commit, but understand the dynamics and where you want to apply yourself within the dynamics of the market.
Your first role at Bentall Kennedy, now obviously Bentall Greenock, was that an analyst role? How did you get your start? How did it pan out in terms of your expectations of what it might be like?
Yeah, so it was at an analyst role, and going back to my time at UBC, the other thing that the urban land economics program did very well was introduce the students to industry professionals to understand what a path to their chosen career might look like. And I recall having a kind of a small format lunch with a gentleman named Malcolm Leach, who at the time was one of the head portfolio managers at Bentall. And a lot of the questions from the students were around, okay, how did you get where you were, but also how does someone get their foot in the door at Bentall? And his advice was very rarely do they bring people in with no experience, so it's tough to make the jump from UBC right into Bentall. And his recommendation was to go out and find a job that you could gain the most experience from in the shortest amount of time, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But and then come to Bentall with kind of 3 to 5 years of really good experience. And that's how you begin your path as an analyst at Bentall. So what I did was I knew I wanted to learn at a high rate to develop that real experience. And so I was gravitating towards jobs that had a high degree of deal flow. So I explored brokerage as an option. I explored going to a larger market like Toronto, but ultimately ended up at a mortgage syndication and investment shop here in Vancouver called Carevest Capital, which is still around today. And I started there as an underwriter. And so we would underwrite 5 to 6 deals every week. And they would range from raw land acquisitions out in the Fraser Valley to value add repositioning plays in the downtown core. So got to see a broad spectrum of real estate deals and understand what made them work and what didn't make them work. And so from there, I made the jump from that role into an analyst role at Bentall Kennedy.
Can you describe perhaps your first year at Bentall Kennedy as an analyst? What sort of stuff were you doing?
Yeah, I think my first year, I felt like I was just really fighting for my life every day, to be honest, in the professional sense. Like, I remember coming into that office at the time, and I'd have to walk down this hallway to get to my desk. And it was a 4-foot wide office hallway, but it felt like it was 4 inches mentally. I'd have to walk by names like Mark Raku, John Purcell, Bobby Tam, Crystal Burns, Mary Aubrey, Brian Hagerman, and I'd get through that gauntlet, and then I'd turn a left and I'd have to get past Malcolm's desk, Remco Dahl, Tony Astle. So just an incredible group of real estate professionals. And in that environment, you had to be 100% on at all times. So for me, the first year there was, certainly a lot of hard work, but not just in the sense of long hours. It was, a lot of thoughtful analysis and I think a learning of what the overriding priorities were for that business at the time, Bentall Kennedy, and how everything flowed from that. And the overriding goal of that business at the time was managing third-party clients' money. And so there was this uncompromising commitment to being a fiduciary and acting out of integrity to the client, because when they entrust their money with a group like Bentall, it's generally for the stability that it offers as a manager. And so it's kind of like a sleep at night real estate investment, and everyone acted with that in mind. And I think that first year was really eye-opening me to see that and experience decision-making through that lens, because it transcends just like the individual real estate deals. It's really the approach to everything at a company of that scale. And I don't think you could do it otherwise.
And you went on to achieve a number of promotions at Bentall Kennedy. So what do you think it took to be successful in that particular environment?
Well, like I said, you had to be 100% on at all times. I think certainly, as I mentioned, there's hard work in there, but I'll go back to really embracing what the goals and objectives are. And like I said, that was to act as a fiduciary to the clients. And, they train that into people who are just starting in their careers or in their first years at the company. Like you'd fly up to places like Port Hardy or Kelowna or Prince George, and you do investment updates with some of the trade or pension funds or endowments that had invested in Bentall. And it gave you a very clear understanding that you were there managing these people's real estate investment, and the outcomes mattered to them. Like there were real outcomes there. It wasn't just numbers in an Argus model or Excel sheet. So I think I embraced that philosophy fully. And that was certainly one of the contributing factors to being able to be promoted in that environment. Hard work. I mean, there's no substitute to hard work, but I think it's not blind hard work either. I always approached everything with an attitude of just say yes to it, because it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for me to improve myself. It's an opportunity to learn something new. It's an opportunity to work with some of these incredible professionals. So for me, everything was an opportunity, and I tried to say yes as much as possible. And sometimes that more than anything led to the long hours in the office. Early on, I received some really good advice from someone that had been at Bentall for a while. And the situation was I had made an error in an Argus model, underwriting a new acquisition that we were making. And it found its way all the way to the final analysis through a few checks and second set of eyes. And we ended up acquiring the property under an incorrect NOI. And it wasn't a huge amount, but it was obvious after the transaction when we started managing the property that there was an error there. And so obviously at that stage, I assumed that was going to be the end of my time at Bentall. But the advice I got was to stand up and take accountability. Don't try to hide from it or hide from the reason the error occurred. Show you learned from it. And that advice came from someone who wasn't working in the deal. It was just another person at Bentall, and I was talking to them about it. And they said, people will respect that you took that accountability and will give you another chance. And so I did that. And obviously the fallout wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, and went forward with a mindset of learning from that mistake, but really taking responsibility over checking my own work. Because as I said, we had these processes where there'd be second set of eyes on the underwriting for every deal, but it got through there. And I think for me, it reinforced that you have to have a certain amount of personal responsibility. And so for every deal going forward, I did that. And I developed a bit of a reputation on the underwriting side of being kind of the go-to person for getting complex underwritings completed. And so I would get pulled into a lot of different deals in a lot of different markets, and would end up underwriting transactions from, in Calgary and in Toronto and even into Montreal. So that certainly helped me. But the last point I would make on my time at Bentall, and not every story has to be learning from mistakes. And this one would be, I guess, somewhat self-congratulatory in nature. But I remember getting my first invite to an investment committee meeting, and I went in ultra prepared. Like, I didn't think I would have to do anything. I thought I was just going to have to sit there, maybe answer some questions about the math when it came up. But we were in the investment rationale section, which was at the very start of the memo. And the COO at the time started going around the room and asking every single person what they thought about the rationale for the deal. And I remember I was 3 or 4 people into that order, and the chief investment officer was sitting beside me. And I think both he and I assumed that they were just going to skip right over me and go directly to him. And he started answering when it was my turn. And the COO stopped him right there, said, no, I want to hear what Adam thinks. He's closest to the deal. He's in the market. He did the underwriting, put the memo together. And I just remember absolutely nailing that answer. Like I said, I was ultra prepared. And I came in and I think from there, people appreciated that, the fact that I was prepared, but also that I had an opinion that was informed and based in the work that had been done up until that point. So I think that was another one of the, maybe not necessarily that specific incident, but just that approach to things resonated with people and carried forward through my time at Bentall.
Are you looking for a trusted recruiter who lives and breathes Canadian real estate? At Highview, we bring over 30 years of recruiting experience to help steer you in the right direction. We are passionate about your success in this industry and will always do our best to provide you with all the information so that you can make the best decision for your career. Contact Highview Partners today to discover how we can connect you to people who perform.
You got to Director of Investments at Bentall Kennedy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And like, what was it about the opportunity at Low Tide that, kind of swayed you, or how did that decision come about?
partly a relentless recruiting pitch from the president, Andrew Chang. He was not necessarily, trying to just recruit me through, offers of job title, compensation, etc. It was relentless in the direction the low tide portfolio was going and how exciting it was and the opportunities from a professional level that would be available to me making the switch to low tide. At the time I made the switch, the company was really coming out of its startup phase and hitting this rapid growth mode. And why they were targeting someone with my skill set was they were just starting to build in the asset management function into the portfolio and company. So for me, it was an opportunity to obviously join a group that I thought was up to some exciting things, both here in Vancouver and in the Seattle market, but kind of a prove it rationale. Like, I'd gone through this incredible training at Bentall and acquired these skills, and I just wanted to be able to step into an environment where I could really prove that I could do it and didn't have to rely on all these support systems or various silos at Bentall. And so for me, it was a combination of the desire to prove to myself that I had actually learned these skills and could apply them, and then obviously the trajectory of the portfolio at low tide.
And for anyone that might be unfamiliar listening to this podcast, like, what can you tell us about, or I guess, what can you tell us about how low tide came to be, a bit of the backstory, and then I guess how would you define the group's purpose?
Yeah, so it's evolved. Certainly, low tide has evolved as a company and what its purpose is over the years. It was originally started in 2010, and it was a partnership between our current CEO, David Ferguson, and Chip Wilson. And at the time, it was envisioned to be much smaller in scale than we certainly are now. I think it was their original investment goal was to place around $200 million in value add opportunities in emerging neighborhoods around Vancouver. And that was kind of it. I think it was only 3 people running it, third-party property management, like very, very lean operation. But over time, the goals and objectives of low tide changed. And that evolution was really initiated by the Wilson family office, which is called Hold It All. And they began diversifying out of Lululemon and into other asset classes. And real estate was one of those chosen asset classes. There are, number of reasons for that. Value preservation, the risk profile of real estate. There's some tax planning that goes into it. And then it also serves some of the other initiatives that were very important to the family office, like things like public art and public realm activations. And so in 2014, the company took its next evolution to more of what it is today, which is an investment and operating company. And the strategy also involved, it took that initial strategy of emerging neighborhoods and really defined what we meant by emerging, which was trying to find areas that were in the path of growth, where the growth rate in rental rates in those markets would outpace the general growth rate across Vancouver broadly. And so that led us to really start investing heavily into these concentrations of properties within fairly tight geographic areas within the city of Vancouver. And then once we kind of paired up that, call it financial or economic investment thesis with an overriding purpose, which was to improve the buildings we owned or improve the neighborhoods we are in for the benefit of the residents or tenants in those neighborhoods, and to focus on the community more holistically, that's when the company really started taking off. And that was probably in 2017.
Yeah, I'm interested. How big is the team now?
So right now I'll call it 65 people. In the office, we're just over 50. We have a on-site building operations team, which obviously those people are out at the properties. And so when I started, I think I was employee number 14. So, and then that was just over 5 years ago. So there's certainly been not just rapid portfolio growth, but rapid growth in the company just from an employee standpoint.
So can you describe your role as VP asset management and development? Like, what's your scope of responsibilities?
Yeah, so ultimately my role carries the responsibility for the financial performance of the portfolio, but the strategic oversight to get us to that financial performance. And so it's development kind of slots into asset management, and asset management is a pretty broad umbrella at low tide. We start with fundamentally what are the goals and objectives that the family office wants to see out of its real estate investment into low tide. So we have strategic plans that we update every 5 years and annual operating plans. And within that, we spend the time to make sure that our key performance indicators are aligned with what the family wants. And some of those are certainly financial and typical financial metrics for real estate investment, but some of them are non-financial, like things like public art and public realm activations. It's very important to contribute to the fabric of the city. And so we bake that into our KPIs. And then from there, it waterfalls down to, okay, what is the strategy for each specific neighborhood that we're in? How do the properties in that neighborhood respond to that strategy? Asset management's responsible for the leasing at the property level. We're responsible for capital projects, those public art and public realm activations. Those also sit within asset management. And then, as I mentioned, development is another piece. Now, we don't set out to have a robust development pipeline. We certainly do execute on projects where it makes sense within our existing portfolio, and the property's time has come for redevelopment. But we do most of our development through third-party partners like PCI here in Vancouver, and a company called Continental Properties down in Seattle. So for us, development is opportunistic within our own portfolio. But we also, in those partnerships, we obviously are intended to be the long-term owner post-completion. So we obviously have opinions on the strategic direction of what those development sites are going to be and how we want them to operate long-term. So we're involved there, but development is kind of just another element to asset management at low tide.
Sounds like a really great role. And what would you say you enjoy most about it?
I think it's the impact we have at the neighborhood level, both through bettering our properties, but also contributing to what these neighborhoods are within the context of the broader city of Vancouver, and being able to contribute to what makes those places great. And so when we come into a neighborhood, we don't try and implement a strategy that's just what low tide thinks should happen. Our strategy really comes out of the work we've done to understand that neighborhood and what's going to make it unique and what's going to give it a competitive advantage when tenants are looking at that neighborhood versus another one. So seeing how that whole strategy comes together and then having the ability to execute on it and influence it through the operations at our properties, that to me is the best part. It's not really a kind of paint by numbers approach, and it's much more granular and active.
Yeah, I mean, I've been following the group for many years as well, and it's clear there's been kind of a few different iterations of how the company's presented itself, but certainly over recent years, like the getting clearer on and defining these neighborhoods and marketing those as distinct kind of neighborhoods has been a really interesting strategy to watch, and I can see how you would find that impactful. I guess a bit of a fun sort of question. We'll see how we go with this, but the neighborhoods that you operate in, if I could ask you in like maybe 5 or 6 words or less, like how you would define these neighborhoods, let's see how we get on.
Okay.
So, Gastown.
All right. Let me get efficient with my words here. Gastown is complex. It's inspiring. It's maddening, and it's unique. That's probably only 4 or 5, but that's Gastown for me.
Kitsilano.
Kitsilano it's the best street for technical apparel in the world, and by that I mean West Fourth.
Strathcona.
I think Strathcona is a place for passionate small businesses.
Mount Pleasant.
Mount Pleasant it's the nexus for the frontier economy. And by that frontier economy, I mean, the life science ecosystem and some of the more forward-looking tech initiatives that Vancouver is becoming really well known for, like clean tech and AR, VR and those things.
That's a good one. South Flatz.
Oh, this is the easiest one because we've just wrapped up a bit of a branding exercise to get very specific on what we want the South Flats to be. So the South Flats is Vancouver's global champion for creative innovation.
Like it. Good job. Good job. So five distinct neighborhoods. How does low tide's strategy like differ between the neighborhoods? I don't know whether that's a really big question, but yeah, how do you see them? Well, how do you operate in those markets?
Yeah, I alluded to it earlier. Each neighborhood is unique, and the strategy has to respond to the unique nature of the neighborhoods. We can't dictate it. So I think the easiest way to explain it, maybe I could use Strathcona as an example. And I mentioned like a place for passionate small businesses. We own about 17 properties in a four block stretch. And what we found is that those local small businesses, there is such a powerful networking effect within that community. They understand the struggles of bringing a small business to market and those early years. And so they support each other. And when we realized that, and Strathcona was a place where a lot of these groups were starting because, rents were at a place where they would make sense for their operating business. We embraced that. And we had a property that sat vacant for 2 years. We had just done a value add renovation to it. And it sat vacant for 2 years. It's 868 East Hastings where the garden is. And it was vacant before I got to low tide, and I kind of inherited it. And every 2 months, I would get a call from the leasing rep from Starbucks and saying, "Hey, can we lease that space now?" And I remember I'd just come from Bentall, and at Bentall, this would have been a no-brainer. We would absolutely, we've got Starbucks, incredible covenant. Let's do that deal. And it was just, talking with David, the CEO, it was just, no, that's not the strategy here. We've got to be patient. We've got to stick to the strategy. And we eventually ended up doing a lease with a group called The Garden, who run a small cafe, a plant business, and a commissary at the back of it. And it's 2 women entrepreneurs here in the city. And this was their first location and first shot at it. And, it wasn't easy for them. And we had to be very flexible in terms of how we, administered the lease terms and things like that, just understanding that you're doing a 5-year lease, but this tenant is effectively month to month until their business gets solidified. So you understand that going in, you do your deal eyes wide open, and that process and that partnership that we were able to forge with them in terms of understanding what was critical to their business has led to so much word of mouth marketing for that Strathcona community. We've been able to bring in other incredible groups like Willet and Hype Chocolate, and it's just Prototype Coffee is another one. There's just such a powerful networking effect in that. So, you can't take that Strathcona story and just move it into Kitsilano. It's a completely different world in Kitsilano. So it's learning what is really going to be the competitive advantage for that specific neighborhood, and then strategizing around it. And so we've done that with all 5 of the neighborhoods, and they're all 5 have their own unique strategies because of that.
Another observation, I mean, I follow Low Tide on the social channels, and it's really clear that, you do a great job of shining a spotlight on like local businesses and kind of promoting those businesses and the stories behind them. And I know it's not like a new concept. You're not the only group that does it, but it seems like there's real intention to seek out these local operators. I mean, you mentioned the garden. I don't know whether there's any other sort of examples of sort of local tenants that you can really speak to.
I think it's the philosophy of customer service and partnership that we embrace wholeheartedly. Like, if you, in our business as a long-term holder of real estate and trying to generate income returns from that portfolio, if you don't have tenants in your space willing to pay you rent, you're not doing a good job of fulfilling that mandate. So for us, we very much view ourselves as a customer service business, just dressed up as a real estate investment company. And it sounds kind of altruistic, but we want tenants, when they come into our portfolio, to see value beyond the 4 walls and the roof. Like, we strive to create connections with other tenants for business development opportunities. How can we promote what our tenants are doing through the social media channels? And I don't know if we were the first to do this, but I know we were very early in the Vancouver market to do this, but was to dedicate a team to making those type of things happen. So we have Kathy Tulos, who's our director of community and tenant relationships. And her job is really to weave that golden thread throughout the entire portfolio and find those opportunities for our tenants to feel like, one, they have a landlord that understands their business and is here to do whatever we can to support the success of their business. And so that, I think it certainly resonates with a lot of tenants in our portfolio.
Yeah. I think you're probably the first to have someone like Kathy in a role like that. But it kind of sounds like what WeWork would have been pitching back in the day, when they sort of try and promote the businesses in their co-working spaces.
That's a very good parallel. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that one yet, but very good parallel.
So you mentioned this. I didn't write down your 5 or 6 words for the different neighborhoods, but because I can listen back to them. But you speak in a few panels, Adam, and I've always whenever I've heard you, I think you do a great job in that, and perhaps that in part because you get to talk about such exciting projects, but you do a good job nonetheless. My question is, when you're thinking about space and anticipating needs and the future of these neighborhoods that you operate in, what are some of the trends that you're kind of paying attention to?
Unfortunately, I've put that pressure on myself to try and be very thoughtful and engaging on these panels, because I think I've been noted as saying, if you're hearing something for the first time on one of these panels, you're typically behind. So I now have to walk the walk on those. Well, let me stick with life science. I mean, you mentioned it. Life science is very interesting for us, and for 2 reasons. One, we've owned a life science portfolio for some time now. We bought our first life science building in 2014, and we've developed a bit of an internal expertise in running these buildings. We've had really great continuity in the operations teams at those properties. So those building operators and property managers have been able to learn what tenants need out of these facilities to again, make them very valuable to them. But beyond that, what we've seen in the life science industry is an evolution towards, and this is enabled by advances in technology and investment by both federal and provincial governments into facilities and into process and go-to-market paths for these companies. But what we've seen and observe is these life science companies are able to get therapeutics or products to market faster, and they're able to get them to the retail market instead of just, I'll call it the institutional or hospital market. And why that's important is because I think it matches with a trend of people being more aware of health and wellness, and more aware of wanting to have longer, health span or longevity in their lives. And so on the retail side, there's this brewing demand for it, and these companies are able to get the product to the retail consumer. And so we see that as kind of the rocket fuel for the life science industry. There's so many opportunities with that. And for us, it gives us a lot of confidence that market is going to continue to grow. And then that's kind of broadly the life science market, but specific to Vancouver, then Vancouver has just an incredible built-in talent production system for life science. We talk to a lot of our companies in our portfolio that have locations in Seattle and San Francisco and Boston, these other big life science hubs. And what they always say to us is Vancouver will always be a chosen location, either for a facility or just a beachhead, because of the talent that the market produces. And that's from the university level, people entering into life science companies, but also the more open immigration policies that we have in Canada lead to a broader pool of talent that these companies can access. So for them, it's a compelling reason to stay here, and a great reason to grow within the city. So, like I said, despite some current headwinds in the industry around the investment side of things, it's just those big macroeconomic tailwinds we think are going to carry it forward, to pair up with those changing dynamics on the demand side and the ability for these companies to get product to market.
Shifting gears a little bit, Adam, I want to talk about industry associations, because I think this has been a strong theme throughout your career as well, and in particular your involvement with ULI. So perhaps you can tell us what has been your involvement with ULI over the years, and what have you found to be the benefits of the association, perhaps compared to some of the other groups out there.
Yeah, I started with ULI when I was actually at UBC, and got involved with volunteering in what is still called the Young Leaders Group. There were the traditional groups at that time like NAOP and BOMA and UDI. And ULI for me was interesting because it presented the broadest cross-section of disciplines within the real estate industry. NAOP is much more commercial investment focused, lots of brokers, lots of landlords. BOMA was more the operating side, but ULI for me gave me exposure to everything. And because of that, I thought, I'd go to these events, and either the event itself was very educational, but the conversations I would have at the event were also very educational. So I just continued to get a lot out of it, and started committing more and more time to volunteering at ULI, and eventually, took over leadership of the Young Leaders Group for a few years. And that group was made up of a small but very passionate group of volunteers that were able to grow that program and platform quite significantly here in the Vancouver market, because ULI, it's massive in the US, it's massive in Europe and Asia, but in Canada it was always kind of lagging behind. So the mandate and the desire from the volunteers was to grow that, to kind of showcase the great things that could be done through ULI. And so from there, I've continued to stay involved. I've been on the district council for a number of years, serving terms there. Spent some time with what's called the ULI Next program, which is more of a North American-wide subset of ULI that tries to focus in on a narrower set of issues, but really try to bring some best practices forward in those issues and take learnings from other markets and apply them throughout North America. So yeah, I've really enjoyed my time with ULI and continue to enjoy volunteering there. I've scaled back my volunteering in recent years as work and family obligations have ramped up for me, but certainly continue to be involved where I can and am supportive of the programming that they're doing.
Yeah, excellent. And you're also a member of the Mount Pleasant Business Improvement Association. I guess just briefly, like, what are the key issues or opportunities facing that group?
At Low Tide, we're involved in the business improvement associations with in all the neighborhoods that we're a part of, and we do that to advocate both for ourselves and tenants' interests in the varying neighborhood dynamics. But Mount Pleasant's been an interesting ride because of the introduction of the Broadway extension period since we've acquired our first properties there through to today. And it's an interesting one because there's such a desire in Mount Pleasant to keep what's really, really good about that neighborhood and the fabric of it. And how do you bring in new development or density into that without compromising that? And it's a very, very delicate dance. And, despite the Broadway plan being enacted and being available, I don't think there's been as much development as people anticipated because of that. You don't want to come into Mount Pleasant and get it wrong, because the reasons that make Mount Pleasant great will disappear. And then you've kind of built something that just is not responding to those neighborhood dynamics. So it's a neighborhood that is obviously going to see change. But I don't think it's going to be an overwhelming tidal wave of change. I think it will be very intentional by the groups that are there, and the groups that have invested in Mount Pleasant for a long time understand that. They're not kind of large faceless development or real estate investment organizations. There's a lot of the private companies that are based here in Vancouver and understand what that neighborhood is.
I've got a few quick questions for you before we wrap up. So Low Tide are in all the coolest neighborhoods, and it seems like you've got your finger on the pulse of cool spots of interest. So do you have a favorite neighborhood, first of all?
The neighborhood I enjoy spending the most time in is Strathcona, and that it's just the passion of the small business is there. It's like a magnet. If you go into like Prototype Coffee, Matt, who runs it, he's like a mad scientist in there, and he's got all the machines that are roasting this coffee. They're all out, and you can see them, and you can see that there's these screens connected to each of them, and you can see what's happening to the coffee as it's being roasted in terms of its the chemistry of it. It's really cool, and you can't help but and the passion he has for it, you can't help but get sucked into that. So I love going out and spending time in Strathcona. There's such a love of the craft of what those businesses do. It's incredible to be around.
Well, you answered my next question about the favorite coffee shop. So that's Prototype. What about, I'm not sure if you're a drinker, favorite brewery?
I guess I got to be biased. We've got Strathcona Brewing in the portfolio, and they do some really cool stuff. What they do really well is their partnerships. And so they'll partner with other groups like, maybe it's like Dankmart, and they'll establish a little section within the restaurant side of their brewery, and then they'll bring those in, and there'll be tons of collaboration. So they do a fantastic job of that. I'm going to go with the Strathcona Pilsner is up there for me.
Okay. They do good pizza there too.
They do. Yeah. The food is very, very good.
And then favorite restaurant
in our portfolio?
Well, you're going to probably pick one from the portfolio, aren't you?
Yeah. It's tough because we've got a couple, but I'm going to go with Monarca and Gastown, which is a Mexican restaurant, and it's the second restaurant from the group that did Ophelia in the Olympic Village. And the menu is the chef's grandma's like home cooking menu.
Yeah.
So it's and I believe they were from Mexico City, so it's obviously regional there, but it's got just a different flavor to it than what you would classify as typical Mexican food. So for me, there's probably not a bad thing on that menu. And another good example of a business that I think just gets the philosophy of like, if you have an incredible environment where people want to come and connect in, you'll be successful. So they do fantastic like music there, pop-up events, things like that. It's a great space, and they do a great job of running it, and the menu's fantastic.
I haven't been there, so want to check out for sure. Adam, when you're hiring for your team, let's get this question in there. What attributes do you typically look for? Like what makes someone stand out for you when you're hiring at Low Tide?
Curiosity. I always want to see curiosity, just a willingness to ask the question, ask why 5 times until you drill down to the fundamental thing. I think that to me is critical, because that just shows me a willingness to learn, or a willingness to understand. Maybe it's someone's got a difference of opinion, and you need to start from understanding what that opinion is in order to come to a solution. So curiosity certainly is at the top. I love people who have an attention to detail. Maybe that's me kind of outwardly manifesting my attention to detail, but I think it's so important to again be responsible for what you're working on, and not just rely that the system will take care of it, or the second set of eyes will take care of it somewhere down the line. Just taking ownership of it and responsibility is also really, really important to me.
And finally, if you could go back in time, what's the best career advice you would give your younger self? And I think you got a lot of good career advice, so I'm not sure what you have to say for this.
Yeah. You know what? It's a pretty simple one. I think like, networking would be one I would say for sure across the board, but it's not the one I want to leave with. I think, when I was earlier in my career, I thought networking was kind of cheesy and like not something I needed or wanted to do. But over time, I've come to understand the power of your network, especially in the real estate industry. So I would always encourage people to embrace it and get comfortable with it. But the one I would actually tell my younger self is be polite, be almost excessively polite. And an example I'll use of this, and I only really came across this group 6 or 7 years ago, is Corbell Commercial. And they do a lot of work out in East Vancouver, and Mark Saul and Robert Tam, who run that shop, are the most polite people you could ever hope to deal with. And they're so responsive, and it makes me just like, from a business development standpoint for them, it's like, it makes me just want to pick up the phone and call them for every single listing we have. And the lesson I would take from that is just, it's a simple thing to be polite, but it is such an effective business development tool. And I think that would be something I would tell my younger self is never forget that. It's a people business, and regardless of win or lose on certain deals, whatever it may be, if you're able to be polite and operate with integrity through that process, the next one will come around your way.
Yeah. All right. That's a great way to wrap up. Thanks so much for your time and sharing, Adam. Really appreciate it.
For sure. Yeah. No, it was appreciate you having me on and being able to tell the Low Tide story a little bit more, and mine as well.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform. the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.